Good Monday morning, everybody. It is the first Monday of fall, which means new routines, recommitting to business, all these things Brad and I were talking about off camera, which, hey, maybe we'll now talk about on camera. But first, hello, everybody. I am Angie Callen. I am your host of No More Mondays podcast, where we believe you can have a thriving life and an amazing career or business on your terms. And it is my job to bring you guests who not only prove that fact, but have resources to help you do the same. For all of you listening to us on a podcast feed, I do want to remind you that we go live on LinkedIn every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain, noon Eastern. So if you want to catch this conversation as hot off the press as you possibly can, that is where you want to tune in. Now, let's get to today's guest. I have a very special friend joining me today, and I should start off with either a warning, a disclaimer, or a just, hey, isn't this neat? Whatever makes you feel good about it. But that Brad Farris and I are both former engineers turned coaches. So that should just tell you about what you're about to get into. Yep. No wonder we get along so well. Brad has spent the last 20 years working with creative agency founders, which I also think is so cool coming from an engineering background, to help them hone their leadership skills and solve the problems that hold their businesses back from growth. Through his experience, he's realized a very important fact, and that is that the barrier to growth, whether it's in career or business, is usually right between our ears. So we're going to work on that today. What do you say? Brad Farris, welcome to No More Mondays.
Thanks so much, Angie. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, secret for everybody out there, or backstory. Brad and I have done a couple things together, and we hang out in some circles, so we get to chat a lot. And I respect Brad's opinion and position on kind of entrepreneurship and business growth, which is why I'm excited to have you here, because you've been an entrepreneur pretty close to your entire career, or enough that we can call it that, right?
2/3 of my career for sure at this point.
Man. How's the last 20 plus years treated you?
It's been good. I mean, it has its ups and downs. 2009 was not a great year, but
I think everybody on the planet could say that.
2021 was a really good year, so
yep.
You have some.
Although, 2009 was my first full year in Colorado. So maybe it wasn't totally all bad, but yeah, career economically, not so much.
I made half of my income that year in the month of December. But just to give you any idea of what that year was like.
Yeah, which means you were sweating bullets for 364 days.
And then landed a whale and rode it till the end of the year. It was great.
Hey, sometimes all it takes is one.
That's right.
And, this gets into something that we talked a little bit about, and I want to hear more about your perspective, is that sometimes it can be harder. Okay. And I wonder if this came up at that point in time, but the idea that it oftentimes is harder to take a risk once we've actually seen success. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's something that's coming up with a bunch of my clients, because the clients that I work with, they've started their business maybe between 5 and 10 years ago, and they've gotten to a level of success that they're comfortable with, right? They're able to take some extra time off. They're making reasonable money. But they're still not in that place that they had dreamed of when they started their business.
Yep.
And so the next steps forward, like the next things that they need to do to grow their business, all of a sudden get really scary. And I look at them and I say, how can this be scary? You leapt off a cliff 5 years ago and invented wings on the way down. And now you've got $1 million or $2 million in revenue, and you're scared of making change. But when they jumped off the cliff, they had nothing to lose, right? Like, what's the worst that would happen? They just go find another job.
The worst that would happen is you wouldn't succeed.
Right. Yeah.
Because this resonates a lot with me right now. And we were, again, we had an entire episode's worth of a conversation in the 7 minutes of the green room, everyone. But this resonates a lot with me. And I'll give you like almost a case study for this.
Yeah, sure.
I'm at the point of a little bit of a pivot from the bread and butter of my business has been career coaching, primarily, technology and executives, especially for the last 3 or 4 years. And while I'm not going to give that up entirely, I have to say no to some of that in order to bring on board more of what I really know I want to do. My purpose is which is more in the coaching of coaches, business coaching, leadership, and executive coaching space. And you hit the nail on the head and maybe filled in a gap I hadn't even been able to articulate for myself, is that when I started Career Benders, I kind of had nothing to lose because I was building on a blank slate.
That's right.
Now I have to take an eraser to some of my slate, and that is very scary.
That's right. And this is true of almost everybody who's trying to take something to the next level, is that we need to let go of something in order to grab onto the new thing. And most often the thing that we're letting go of is something that we're really good at and that people are willing to pay us good money for, but it's just not giving us life the way it used to. And so letting go of it when it feels like such a sure thing, while we're grasping for this new thing that we're not totally sure of, that's a huge shift. And it's something that kind of stops people in their tracks.
Well, I have this vision of Tarzan, right?
Yes.
Flying from rope to rope. And in
That's
order
right.
to do this, at some point you kind of, you can be on like this for a little while, but eventually your arms are going to get a little stretchy. And you bring up a really, really good point, because I'm going to shout out if Diana Alt's listening. I got to give her credit for this. She and I were talking one day and she was like, I feel like this is my zone of greatness, but not my zone of, genius.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that at one point, your zone of greatness was your zone of genius.
That's right.
But in mastering it, you developed a different or a next level zone of genius.
That's right.
And you've got to take the leap to the next rope in order to live in that space.
That's exactly right. And the thing that's hard about that is that this thing that was our zone of genius and is now our zone of competence, people keep asking us for it, right? And it feels like a sure thing. But if you keep holding on to it, that's where burnout comes from, because you're just not getting back from it what you were getting back from it before. And so work comes in and you're like, I have to do that again. And we want to avoid this change because it feels almost like death. Like the way that letting go of something that was paying us, that we're successful at, to go for something new, it's a little bit of a death, and it's hard.
And so the point here is that like 90% of this is mental. And talk about a freaking conversation that I needed to like look in the mirror and have with myself. I guess I needed Brad to be the other side of the mirror today. And it's because this is all resonating. And it's funny because I could tell somebody this, but then for some reason, having the conversation with somebody else about those people helps you realize where you're stuck yourself. And I've always told people that, 90% of entrepreneurial success is mental. That's really, this is a very, very big example of when what's between our ears is getting us in the way from getting to the next level.
And a big part of that is this is an identity shift, right? So when I think about my clients, and you might be feeling a little bit of this also, they started a business because they were good at something, right? And now they've hired people to do that something. And their job now is to move up to be more of a leader and spend more time operating the business as opposed to doing the thing. But their identity is someone who does the thing. And so at the end of the day, when you're a thing doer, you knew you had a good day because you checked a whole bunch of things off your list.
Yeah.
But when you move into that leadership role, you don't get as many things to check off your list. The things that are on your list are harder. They take longer. They're more uncertain.
And they're less tangible. And this is, for those of you out there listening who are like, okay, are Brad and Angie just going to talk about business ownership for an hour? Yes, we are. However, what we're talking about right now is 110% applicable to anybody in a career path where they've now found themselves in their first leadership or the dreaded middle management position, where all of a sudden your entire job is not to check boxes. It's to at least partially help people check the boxes. And that is a fundamentally different place to be. Like you said, it's a different identity.
That's right. And making that identity shift you were talking about is 90% mental. That is a huge mental barrier for people to think of themselves now in this new category, because so much security came out of, I know how to do the thing. When I move into this more intangible place, it feels really insecure. Like I don't know how to measure whether I'm doing a good job there.
And a lot of times, especially if you're doing this in a company, and I would actually say now the flip side is this applies to business owners, is there isn't a good example, there isn't good training if you're in a company to help you fill those, like it's a softer thing, right? It doesn't have as many metric driven outcomes.
Yeah.
And now you're like, wait a minute. If any of you out there have ever read the E-Myth, this
Yes.
is moving much more into manager / being entrepreneur and letting the technician be delegated to somebody else.
Yeah.
But especially technical people, and this is where the two engineers can probably get on a soapbox together. It's very common in technical environments because engineers are used to being very detail oriented technical problem solvers, and now all of a sudden, we're left to go use communication skills many technical people don't naturally have, and we're led, now we have to go delegate, which means relinquishing control over the problem solving and the detail oriented. It's a fish out of water situation, and a lot of environments don't necessarily support that growth, which is where we're left to really hone in our own self-development and self-leadership.
And that's another part of this identity shift, is that most likely you got to this place because you were an expert in your technical domain. So if we're going to talk about engineers, when I was at the top of my engineering game, I had a team of engineers working with me. They came to me to help them solve the hardest problems. I got a lot of psychic reward out of being kind of the top technical person, right?
Mm-hmm.
As I moved into management, I became the bottom management person. I didn't know what I was doing, right? There was a lot of things that I wasn't very good at. Communication, I was better than other engineers, but that's a pretty low bar.
That doesn't say much, Brad. So it's safe to say your communication skills then were not what they are now.
Well, yeah, we could say that. I could tell a funny story about that, but I'm going to skip it for now. I was giving a presentation to the board with another engineer, and the CEO asked him a question. And while he was thinking about it, his story that came out of his mouth was, "Let me think about how I can make this simple enough for you to understand."
So in other words, he just told the whole room, well, let me figure out how to tell this to you, dumbasses.
So the oxygen disappeared from the room. He did not even know this. He was thinking, right?
And it is legitimate, right? Like, how do I simplify this enough that it doesn't take 3 hours to explain it? But if open mouth, insert foot just a little bit.
The CEO was so gracious. He said, I'm sure you're up to it.
Lesson for anybody sitting in the room out there: be gracious when you've got somebody up front trying to get used to presenting for the first time.
But so this change in identity is inviting you to be back into that beginner mode of learning and testing and trying new things. And a lot of those things that you're going to learn are actually things that are about growing you as a human. And this is why there aren't a lot of trainings that are going to help you. You're trying to learn empathy. You're trying to learn listening. You're trying to understand things from multiple points of view, because now we're not just in our discipline. We have to understand what the salespeople think and what the marketing people think and what the financial people think. And so there's a whole different way of being in that leadership space than there was in that technical space. And a lot of that is about self-leadership. It's about managing your emotions and managing your mindfulness, your presence, so that you can be with those people, even if you disagree with them or don't understand them.
The identity thing is so interesting for a few reasons. One, I experienced this literally last week, because again, I'm at a point of shifting, and I'm not completely abandoning what was. However, when I go out, I want to lead with a different foot than I have before. Yep. And so I went to a networking event, really for the first time, because I live in the middle of nowhere. I don't go to a lot of networking events anymore, as much as I would love to. And I went to a networking event the first time, and I'm like, I need to change what I have always said. And so basically testing it out, seeing how people react to it, and being okay with, like, this doesn't roll off the tongue as easy as, oh yeah, I'm a career coach. Oh my gosh, I need you. Used to. And figuring out how to maybe combine a couple things so that there's like a crossover identity without doing too much. So that really feels familiar. And especially in at least American society, I don't love this fact. However, we are very attached to the identity. Our overall identity is what we do for work. So when that's floundering a little, you're sitting here going, oh crap, I don't know who I am in any walk of life.
Yeah.
Especially because, I've always said to people, there is no better exploration into self-discovery than entrepreneurship. And
Oh
this
my
is
God.
really where you get opened up and raw.
It really is. Every fear, every hang up, it all shows up in your business and you've got to deal with it.
And you're like, yeah, that was something I didn't need to know about myself, but I guess I can die a whole human because now I do. So, and maybe this is a good point to start getting into a little bit more of the practical component of this. But, let's linger on the self-leadership, kind of self-discovery a little bit more. And if you are in a situation where you aren't getting external support to do this, and you've got to do it yourself, it can make a huge difference. I've actually been doing some reading and listening on this lately. And I recently listened to a Blink. If you haven't discovered Blinkist, everyone, you should.
Yeah.
It's like Cliff's Notes. I just aged myself meets podcasts. And I was listening to
audio book summaries for those of you who
for those of you under the age of 15. I was listening to the summary of Mastering Leadership. And I loved it so much. It's funny how that stuff comes to you exactly when you need it. And they were talking about how critical leadership professional development is, not only to the individual, but even to teams and workplace culture. So this is, again, applicable whether you own your own business or you own a part of someone else's. Because if you're a leader in a company, that's essentially what you do.
That's
so
right.
Talk to me more about how this idea of self-leadership and self-development can impact career and business growth.
But when we're in these new and unfamiliar spaces and we're trying to do things that we haven't done, that we don't have necessarily this track record of doing, what you just talked about, we get in our own way, right? And every human has some habitual patterns of getting in their own way. Some people get scared and they hesitate and they hold back and they don't take the step. Other people are the opposite. They rush into things and they jump off of cliffs and they try things. There are different patterns that people have. And so understanding what those natural patterns are that you use to undermine yourself or get in your own way, then helps us to say, okay, what would I need in order to mitigate that or keep myself on a path of growth?
Oh, can you give me an example?
Sure. I mean, so we have this concept in my organization of scaring yourself. How are you scaring yourself? And so when I listen to a client and she says, there's just no way that I'm going to bring the revenue in to be able to hire this new person. Well, that's a story she's telling in her head, right? And that story is a scary story and it's keeping her from doing the thing. And so we inquire about whether that is true or not. Is it true that there's no way you'll be able to bring in that revenue? And is it true that you couldn't cover that salary even out of cash flow if you needed to? And what is it doing for you to hold on to that idea? Why is holding on to that idea something that you want, as opposed to holding on to the opposite idea, which is, yeah, you could bring in tons of revenue and maybe hire 2 people. And so looking at those things, taking the time to slow down, listen to what that story is and what's going on underneath it, then helps us to overcome those barriers so that we can then take those risks and do the things that are needed in order to grow our business.
A lot of that sounds what we talk about when overcoming imposter syndrome, because that's one way it shows up. And I also think this links back to where we started the conversation with, which is why it can be difficult to take risks after success, is because now we have a story that's easier to tell ourselves, but you also have facts to prove the story wrong.
It's interesting about those facts, because those facts, but you have facts, right? Well, I tried it 2 years ago and it didn't work. Great. What's different today than was 2 years ago? Well, you're different, first of all.
Yeah. And you have the information from that quote unquote failure. I really want to remove that word from all vocabulary, because again, you didn't fail, you learned, and now you can use that information again. So you're not the same.
That's
and you have the experience of attempting it once. So those are 2 pieces already.
That's right. Yeah. And so we have these in getting to success, we have these things that we've learned, right? And we learn them often the hard and expensive way. And we don't want to continue to learn the hard and expensive way. But some things there's no other way to learn. And we have to kind of go through them. Now, you are a different person than when you went through that the last time. So maybe it won't be as hard or as expensive. And if you get some help and don't resist the change, sometimes you can go through it really quickly and easily. But,
and that brings up something you and I have talked about before, which is the three. I had to make sure it was the right number for it. Get the help. And that can be something that, and maybe let's make this tip number 1 of the practical advice segment of today's No More Mondays podcast. That is something that, and this is what Brad and I have talked about literally in front of people before we hosted a webinar on it, was how hard it can be for especially entrepreneurs to ask for help. I would attest that leaders in an environment that isn't set up already can be the same, because it feels like you're admitting a vulnerability. And in today's society, for some reason, that is taboo instead of allowing vulnerability to be your superpower. But asking for help can be really, really difficult. So how can we get over that and just do it?
So I think part of this for the entrepreneur is there was a time in their business when they did do everything, right? They had to. There wasn't anyone else to do it, right? When we get a larger organization, and now we're moving into that leadership role, actually bringing people in who are experts. Hey, I have a finance person who handles the finance, and I have someone who's actually in charge of sales. Like, doing that is the natural next step. But if we're hiring people that know how to do that better than we do, then there's this fear of, well, what if I lose them and then I can't do it for them? Well, then you hire another person. Right. And so we have this identity of, I need to be able to do everything in the company. And that identity is holding us back.
Or the identity that no one else, because there's also the opposite of what you just said, which is the identity or the belief that no one else would be able to do it as well as we can, which is the, number one plight of all micromanagers on the planet. And that is again, shit between the ears that keeps you from moving forward.
Yeah. And
delegation is the spice of life.
What's interesting is, so when people are having that challenge, there's 2 ways that it can go. One is I'll have them imagine someone who could do it better than them. And what would it be like to have someone who could take care of your books better than you could, who could predict financially better than you could? That would be amazing, right? And then on the other side, like if it's in your technical discipline, it's probably true that you can't hire someone to do it better than you can. But could they do it 70% as well for 50% of the cost? Like, that would be a win.
Or, I struggled with this. I have 2 other coaches on the team at Career Benders. And the first, I would say, but I went through, I think 4 before I got to the 2, right? And a lot of that was a learning experience for me on setting realistic expectations of, they don't have to do it exactly like me. They don't even have to do it 70% as well as me. They're going to do it differently. However, as long as that still aligns with the overall goals of the business, processes, best practices we follow, and customer experience and outcomes, that I feel good about having underneath my brand umbrella and reputation, then it's okay. But it took going through 4 people who I think in some of those cases I was trying to make into little Angies. The world does not need 2 of me, people. No. The world does not need 2 of me. Right. And that wasn't ever going to work, versus finding people who, from a communications and a relationship standpoint, could deliver deliver on the same, basis of value, but do it in their own way. And that's when things started to work. So that's what we're talking about here, which is maybe part 2. After get the help, it's 2, be okay with the help, doing things a little differently, even if the outcome is there.
Can I change the wording on that a little bit?
Of course you can.
Because when you're moving from the doing things to the leading things, it feels very out of control, right? Like, how do I know they're going to do it right? And so the tool that we use to do that when we're managing managers as opposed to managing ICs is our values. So this is why companies have value statements and why values are important, is that we want to turn over the responsibility for the results to the team that's doing it. But the values provide the sandbox that contains that says it's all going to be okay. The values are the things that stand in when you're not in the meeting. And so if they do it some way that seems totally crazy to you, but the results still align with the values, then they can make those decisions and move ahead because they knew that if you were in the room, you would endorse this because the values are what holds the boundary there.
I love that you brought values up for two reasons. Because I get two shameless plugs. One, it is the undercurrent of every single one of the 150 plus No More Mondays episodes we've had. Whether it is somebody who has built a successful business and knows who they serve, or has hired staff, or somebody who has found satisfying employment with somebody else, values are the foundation that help people find that equal yoking.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. There's 150 other examples of what Brad and I are talking about. The second thing is if you go to careerbenders.com and click freebies, we actually have a values exercise that will help you identify your core values if you have not already. And even if you have done them and it's been a year or two or you've gone through substantial change, revisit them because they won't change substantially, but they might reprioritize, or one that was number 7 might be number 4 now. And it can be really eye-opening on the way on how you show up and how you want other people to show up. So it's an amazing foundation. And I'm glad that you brought that up as that number 2 is know your values.
And I want to clarify something there because I see people get confused by this a lot. When we're talking about core values, it's not the core values of the team. If you own the business, it's your core values. That's what's important. Yes, you want some input. Yes, you want them to feel like they're contributing, but it's yours. There you go.
Look at that. There's a good little screen grab for later. There you go. And they live here where I can look at them.
That's right. And hopefully they live somewhere where your team can look at them.
Exactly. And actually they're on the front page of our website. So our clients can see them as well. It's that. So to me, and this is a little bit of an aside, but we talk so much in business about like our branding, and you and I were talking about niches earlier, right? You can't identify or have consistency around any of that if you don't have the underpinning of the foundation of values. That's right. Because it will help. It helps decision making, especially if you're out there job searching. We've talked about a lot about leaders in the employment space, but if you're out there job searching, values are just as important, if not more, more for you, because they're really like a navigation system to go find companies that already align with those, or to go into an interview knowing that's what you have to investigate and benchmark your decision making against. And that the same comes from building a business, taking on clients, taking on staff. It's a really great foundation of awareness. It really is like almost like a pre-vetting for alignment and potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that was a good one. I didn't even know we were going to talk about. All right. So we're in practical advice mode. So number 1 is kind of get the help. Yeah. And I'm gonna add. I'm gonna wait and challenge. I'm gonna throw out some challenges to everybody, but I'll wait at the end. So get some help, but maybe before you get the help, know your values so you get the right help.
That's true, and so that you communicate effectively when you're delegating.
Exactly. So now, what's your third number 1 tip for everybody?
So the third one, it's gonna feel a little weird, I think, but when you're doing this process, slow down. We want to get through this transition as fast as we can because it's uncomfortable, right? And why do we want to be in an uncomfortable place? We don't. But this is going to take a period of time. It's not going to happen in a weekend. And just as when you started your business, like if you think of yourself on day 1 and think of yourself today, like if you put day 1 you in your seat today, they would not do well. There's a ton they learned along the way.
Yeah, when I open and look at resumes I wrote 7 years ago, I damn near puke. So there you go.
And if you don't,
tangible example of the point.
Exactly. So it's going to take a while to make this transition, and it's going to feel uncomfortable, and you're going to want to get to the end quickly. But there isn't a quickly. Like, you need to learn all the steps along the way. And so if you're going to be in this place of discomfort for a while, being kind to yourself, taking maybe a little bit of extra time off. Like I tend to take at least one Friday a month where I just go for a hike, and I don't have responsibilities to my family. I don't have responsibilities to my business. I have responsibilities to myself and paying attention to what's going on inside me, and doing some of that work to be aware of your emotional state, so that you're not trying to force things, but that you're letting things happen with the time that it's going to take.
There's a million cliches out there around this subject, and I still attest that they're cliches for a reason. They're usually true. Growth doesn't happen inside the comfort zone. And then sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And it's counterintuitive, especially because slowing down does tend to put us in a place we don't really like to hang out very long. One of the reasons we all went into business ownership was to be less uncomfortable because we can control everything.
Mm-hmm.
However, in this situation, you're usually not in a position to just burn the whole house down and start anew. And that's where, like, I'm experiencing that, where I have to kind of like taper one in order to make time and space for the other, while also maintaining a financial foundation that I need to keep, which is why I can't just say I'm gonna burn this house down and start another, because literally that bought my house. So,
but I think, like, can I use that example a little bit further? So in this conversation, think about how much effort you were using up to support both the career, working in a business, and the entrepreneur side, right? And all of that overhead of trying to support both sides of that. And so it is really tempting to just burn it down, but fiscally irresponsible. So how do we live in that tension? How do we manage that tension? Because here's the thing, once you get into leadership, there's a lot of gray. There's not really any more wins and losses or, right answers. You're going to live with this kind of tension for a while.
I was just going to say, it's not like you ever magically get to tensionless. And I would say the same thing is in business ownership, because we as entrepreneurs tend to get, for lack of a better term, bored with one thing and want the next, because what was our zone of genius is now our zone of competency, and we have a new zone of genius. And it's kind of like a little bit of a continual leapfrogging of it. So to continue using me as an example, which I put my head on the chopping block to do, I am consciously having to say no or find different solutions to the existing clientele who continues to come to me.
That's right.
And it is very hard to tell existing clients, hey, I can't support you the way I did before. But I know that's what I have to do, because also demand is up, right? Like there's multiple reasons. So it's not a no, it's a not like that. And so that's been a compromise that I've found a way that I feel okay saying and okay, implementing, so that I can still keep that foundation. However, make time for building the next story of my building.
And I'll use an example for myself. Late last year, I had a service offering that was taking up a little more than 30% of my time, but only produced 20% of my income. And it was a place where I didn't feel like I was in my zone of genius. And I just sunset that offering. Now, that was a huge chunk of cash to give up, but I knew that if I didn't give it up, I couldn't grab on to the next thing that was coming.
Finish, and then I have a question.
Well, no, go ahead. That was what I want to say.
Well, and I was actually going to say this a minute ago, and I'm glad I forgot and now remembered, because that was a good little piece to segue into it, is that I have found, and I need to remember this fact, if I were to sit down and look at the real story, right? It feels like I can't say no to that because nothing will come to replace it. But if I look at historically, that is never the case. Again, third cliche of the minute that is true is that what are you saying? What do you need to say no to so that you can say yes to? And the yeses always become available, right? So it's not like all of a sudden it's all going to dry up, even though that's part of the entrepreneurial mind bleep that we have forever, is that like, oh, my business is going to crumble tomorrow. But it isn't. And if you look at the data, you could say, if I say no to this thing, I know one of the things I want is waiting in the wings. I just have to have the space for it.
Yeah. And this is a great example of that self-leadership, of being able to slow it down to where you see the story I'm telling. Oh, the story I'm telling is if I let go of this, that there's not going to be anything to replace it. But in fact, I closed 3 of those deals already this year. And right now I'm saying no to some of them because I don't have the time to take them. So maybe that story isn't true, right?
Mm-hmm. And if you stay in the story, if you stay in that story, you're going to continually be on that hamster wheel of your not ideal stuff.
That's right.
And then that's where the burnout comes in.
Exactly. So on my website, I have a short assessment. If you want to learn more about self-leadership and your self-leadership capacity, if you go to anchoradvisors.com/self-leadership-assessment, it's like 10 questions, it takes less than 10 minutes, it gives you a nice report. You don't have to give me an email address, it just is there to help.
Geez, even I make you give me an email address for the core values. Love it. So we're gonna do when the show's over, I'm gonna grab the core values link and I'm gonna grab Brad's self-leadership link, and we'll put them in the comments on the LinkedIn Live, and we'll put them on the show notes at No More Mondays, because I think these are great resources. And 2 of my 3 challenges I'm gonna throw out to you are you actually have physical tools to do. So here's my 3 challenges. Tell me if you agree, Brad. Number 1, get the help. I am going to challenge all of you out there, whether you own a business or work in one, to either outsource or delegate one thing in the next week that you've been holding on to. Hint, hint, if you're a bookkeeper, if you're in business, bookkeeping is number 1, content creation is number 2. So there you go. I gave you a tip.
and I will add to there, virtual assistants are amazing at both of those things. Both of those things.
Yeah, Brad and I are big
not
fans.
Super expensive. Couple $100 and you can never look at QuickBooks again.
And it will make your life better and your financial future stronger.
Yep.
Number 2 is, in order to outsource and delegate more and know how that should look and get the right support, know your values. So I'm going to challenge you to take the core values exercise from Career Benders. And then number 3 is slow down to speed up. And that I'm going to say, be okay hanging out in the comfort zone longer than you want to. Take the pause and then take Brad's assessment so that it will show you where you could potentially improve while you're in that kind of slower personal development space.
I have a practical one for that, if I can tag one on.
Yes.
So I found this study about achieving your goals. And we've all seen the one that if you write down your goals, you're more likely to achieve them. And this one replicated that. But then it went a step further and said, what if you had a friend that you sent an email to every week that just updated them on the progress toward your goals? And just sending that weekly reflection email made an 87% improvement in how people accomplish their goals. And that weekly reflection, it's a moment of slowing down to recommit yourself to your goal, because you're going through each one. What did I do this week? How's it going? And then that reflection also helps you to see when you're off track with your goals and get back on track more quickly. So
it's forced. It's almost like forced accountability.
It is, but it's accountability to yourself.
Yes.
They don't have to do anything other than say, thumbs up. But you're looking at it and you're reminding yourself and you're getting yourself back on track more quickly. So you're spending more time processing toward your goals.
I love this idea of finding your own mechanisms to put in place, especially if you're in business. Although the higher up the leadership ladder you go, the more autonomous and independent you are, and the more of these frameworks of your own you have to put in place to be efficient and accountable. For me, one of the things I do is as simple as I go to the gym at the same time every morning, because I know my friends are going to be there. And they will ask me if I'm not, but mostly it's FOMO.
Yeah.
So I've created FOMO for myself to keep myself accountable. And so you can in a way trick your brain into new habits, which then help build up all these things that we're talking about. And that's this real foundation of professional development, self-leadership, self-development we're talking about. Don't wait for somebody else to come in and push you through it. If you need someone else, that's what Brad and I are here, 12th shameless plug of the episode. However, there's a lot of this you can do yourself if you're disciplined enough to say, this is a guardrail I can put in place for myself to help my own professional development.
I'm doing weekly reflections with a bunch of my clients. And it's been amazing to watch how they develop their own solutions. Like as soon as they see that things are floating off, they figure out, what do I need to do to get back? And just that awareness is enough. And particularly when you're on this journey where the destination isn't super clear, it's out there somewhere, but you don't know necessarily step by step how to get there. Just having some way to slow down, look at things, get back on track makes a huge difference.
And just giving yourself the space for that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Brad, I think we just nailed this conversation.
I'm glad.
I love it. This was good for me personally. I am the number one listener today. I've loved it. But I hope all of you out there really are thinking about life, leadership, business, and career a little differently, and with more control and you have more control and more choices than you think. And that to me really comes full circle with the idea that you can have a thriving career or business and an amazing life. You just have to exercise the level of choice and control you have around what you do, how you do it, and how you grow yourself. And that is what Brad and I do every single day, is help you improve the stuff between your ears so that your overall quality of life is better. And it is as easy as get some help, know your values, and slow down to speed up.
Nailed it.
There you have it. Brad, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today. I always leave a conversation with you with feeling better and also with some food for thought. And I hope everybody out there feels the same way.
Thanks, Angie. It was really fun.
Love it. If any of you out there want the resources from today's episode, either check out the comments on the LinkedIn Live or head over to nomoremondays.info. And remember, we do come at you live every Monday morning on LinkedIn if you want to hear this fresh off the presses. And then we upload to feeds Monday afternoon. So you have countless ways to listen to Brad and I over and over and over again. I want to thank Brad Farris from Anchor Advisors once again for sharing some amazing wisdom today. Thank you all for joining me, and I will see you next week for another edition of No More Mondays Podcast Live. Have a great week, everybody.